Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's CATHETA webinar, live on July 24th, 2025. If it's your first time attending one of our webinars, CATHETA means learning in Creek, and today you will be learning about NAHASDA Tribal Council roles and responsibilities from the amazing Cheryl Cosley. My name is Brianna Birch, and I am the Training and Development Coordinator here at the Native Learning Center. We are so honored that you all could join us today. And I'm going to ask if you all can follow along as I read the disclaimer. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. Also displayed here is our copyright infringement law. This is just a friendly reminder that the webinar presentation materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. Before we get started, I just want to familiarize you all with the learning platform and where things can be found. I have put the link to a PDF of today's slides in the chat. You can also access a copy of the slides as well as access today's webinar recordings in the future by going to the courses section here on our platform. Any resource items for download are also available within the online course when you go through the course pages. Each time you are ready to join one of our webinars moving forward as well, you would just log into the website and then click the large green banner that will be across the top of your screen, like in this picture depicted here. And when you first join the webinar, it is going to prompt you to do an audio test before joining. Please select the listen only option so that we can avoid any audio feedback during the webinar. Also, if you need to change the speaker your sound is playing from, you can also select the phone icon down at the bottom of the screen. And this will bring up a list of your speaker and also mic devices so that you can choose your preferred audio output. And again, we're so happy that you're here. We do encourage you to participate during today's webinar, and we will primarily rely on the public chat. In the left-hand gray menu panel here, you can open the public chat as well as the shared notes. You can, if you click on the public chat, you will see a chat open between all of the webinar attendees, the NLC facilitator, as well as your webinar instructor. Just simply click in the box that says send message to public chat, type the message that you want to send and hit enter, or click on the blue paper airplane icon to send your message in. Please send your comments and any questions you may have into the chat, and feel free to use the raise hand feature in the bottom right corner of the screen if you think that we may have missed something along the way. And any tech support issues can also be submitted here as well, and I'll do my best to support you and try to help you navigate through it. If you click on the shared notes section, you will also find some helpful links, like a link for today's webinar feedback survey, which we do highly encourage you to complete just to let us know how we're doing. You will also find a link to the location of our CATHETA webinars archive on our YouTube channel, a link to connect with us on LinkedIn, as well as a link to bookmark for easy login to CATHETA Constant Learning in the future. At this time, we'd really love to get to know you all and would be honored if you let us know your name, where you're joining us from, your tribal affiliation if you have one. You may also be a tribal employee, and your work or role in Indian country that may have led you to today's webinar. And while everyone is introducing themselves, just one quick final note. If you're inside, just make sure that you avoid clicking on the red menu panel all the way to the left of your screen. If you do click on this red menu panel, it's going to take you out of the live webinar. However, if you accidentally click this, it's okay. You can just simply rejoin by once again clicking on the green banner at the top of the screen. And with that, it is my great pleasure that I introduce today's webinar instructor, Cheryl Cosley. Cheryl, I'm also going to go ahead and hand it over to you now.
Thank you very much, Brianna.
No problem.
Welcome, guys. You made it to day 4. One more after this one. I think the other instructor with NLC are actually the webmaster of sorts. She typed on there, "Happy almost Friday," and that's I think how we all feel. So we made it to day 4. I hope you learned something today, and I hope you come back tomorrow. This presentation is brought to you courtesy of the Native Learning Center and the Department of Housing and Urban Development. More specifically, the Office of Native American Programs. So welcome and good afternoon. I just went and smudged. That's the way we do in Indian country. We start our stuff with a prayer normally. So my name is Cheryl Cosley. You guys all know this by now. My Anishinaabe name is Redbird Woman, and I am Loon Clan. I come from Place of the Pike. Keno Shinkoning is how you say that in my language. And that's the Bay Mills Indian Reservation. We are located in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan at the very top and our waters actually border Canada. We're Ojibwe or Chippewa. We run basically all the way across the top of the state through Montana, and there's lots of us, Minnesota and different places like that. I served as director of housing for my tribe for over 28 years. During that time, I served as chairperson of the Great Lakes Indian Housing Association, the 31 tribes surrounding the Great Lakes, and I was honored to actually serve on the board of directors for the National American Indian Housing Council. I did a little over 16 years there. Started as secretary, went to vice chair, and then I was a 2-term chairwoman. I started Cheryl Cosley and Associates in March of 2019, and I provide training and technical assistance virtually and in person. I travel a lot through the lower 48 and Alaska. So I have been so very privileged to be able to help our community since 1990. So I thank, the creator every day for that. So I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope you learned something. If you ever need anything, please reach out. I'll try to answer your questions. Again, our course description is to help with your knowledge of NAHASDA and making sure you are aware of all the different regulations that we have to adhere to when we accept that money from HUD, and that we have the mechanisms in place, all the policies and the procedures and the different things that we know and we need to know because you're really heavily regulated. So this class was specifically for tribal council, and I'm continuously every day I have an ask of them, share your environmental review staff, share your lawyers, don't jump in on an eviction, all sorts of different things throughout the week. But those are really important when it comes to dealing with the leadership, and the different decisions that they only can make, on behalf of the tribe. So if you're not a tribal leader, I hope you're still learning something. If you are a tribal leader, thank you for spending your time. I know how terribly busy our tribal leadership is, and those jobs are so important to our people. So again, those objectives to learn the requirements we have to have in place to run that successful housing program, and the role of the tribal council in that process. So grab the reference materials. 1, 2, and 3 is basically your guidance documents. There's a lot of documents that will help with your A&O policy. That's probably the most important policy that you have. And there is, things like total development cost, policy status tables, conflict of interest in housing. We're going to get to that today. Tribal wage rates, we talked about that yesterday. Useful life and binding commitments. We have a little bit of slippage in Indian country about that. There's even guidance on Board of Commissioners stipends. You need to, if you have a Board of Commissioners underneath you, make sure that their stipends aren't way out of whack, okay? Because, that'll bring eyes upon you. They shouldn't be receiving any more than any other committee that serves on the reservation. And the Board of Commissioners is not a full-time job. It is not a position that, should make enough revenue. And I've seen that in places where that's basically how they treat it. For every meeting, you should have meeting minutes showing why you had that meeting, and the purpose that you actually conducted, a useful meeting. I've seen all sorts of different things, throughout my travels. Just keep a good eye on that. Make sure your Board of Commissioners are not breaking any laws. Make sure that if they're a tenant, they are, they're not behind on their monies that they could owe your housing entity. Make sure that they're in compliance with their lease, because they're supposed to be that shining example, as are you, as your Board of Commissioners and your tribal council. There's the environmental review requirements in here. We talked about those were just but there's the new guidance on it. Federal supply sources, that's a brand new one that's been republished. We're allowed to utilize GSA, and the administrative requirements for investing our funds should you be in that position. We talked about that A&O policy and the definitions that you use. Well, the guidance for that HOTMA is in here. Should you be using that Section 8 definition, you're going to have to make sure that policy is updated and reapproved by the end of the year. You don't want to get in any trouble. So today we're going to get into conflict of interest, not only in admissions, but the administration of contracts, code of ethics, a 1-year prohibition, your Indian housing plan, annual performance report. So that'll keep us pretty busy for the rest of the day anyway. So the role of your Board of Commissioners and the assistance needed. So even though your housing entity is under the direction of your housing board, there's few mechanisms to provide them with guidance. This is another place where I'm going to reach out and say, we need your help. Okay. It puts your director and the staff in a very awkward position if they are the ones onboarding the Board of Commissioners and they have to teach them about recusal. You're going to be awarding contracts and things like that. You're going to be hearing complaints from tenants who, should they happen to be their family members, they shouldn't be there. They need to be taught about recusal and the proper behavior within a board meeting even. And I look to you as leaders, to perhaps step in and take that, role for teaching them. Recusal, recusal is not just pushing yourself back from the table and trying to keep your mouth shut and not say anything while you're hearing things that you shouldn't be, or they're talking about your family members. Recusal is getting up and leaving the room and putting in the official record that you have recused yourself and left. It's making sure that you don't have access to any of those budgets, any of the materials that could actually be a perceived conflict of interest. That's another place where we need your leadership, to help with those Board of Commissioners. And by all means, if you have a Board of Commissioner that is in place and they are, running amok or however you want to say that, or not following the rules, or not making the meetings, or, really, really acting like they should be running the place. That's not their job to run the housing authority. It's to make sure that the housing authority is well ran. That's when they need to have you step in and excuse them from the board and replace them with a different tribal member. So, and you don't even have to be a tribal member, with a different board member. Okay. IHAs have taken advantage of, trainings like this, but you have to make sure that your board of commissioners are also trained. They need to be trained on proper meeting etiquette, on recusal, on what they should be listening to. And, I try to teach that with like executive director training and things like that. They shouldn't even be hearing who is late. They should be getting, we have somebody that is in a 3-bedroom house who we might have to start the eviction proceedings because they're 4 months late. They don't need to know who it is. They never have a reason to be in a file, So all of that, we need your help with, okay? Setting aside some travel funds and going to a meeting and attending, a half-hour course can be very helpful, but they really need to know their roles and responsibilities as well as you do. So thank you, for coming to this, for taking that time. Please make sure that they do something like that also, or ask for that training and technical assistance. So, somebody can come to you or teach you virtually, or HUD can find a different training to make sure that they are aware of what they need to do. So that there's an imbalance there, basically, when you leave that up to your executive director to try to, teach basically their supervisor, the proper way to act. That's when we need your help. So expected conduct of your board members when it comes to behavior or conduct during your board meetings, your conflict of interest requirements such as recusal, it puts that housing staff in a very difficult position. Those, like I said, are areas that you could definitely help them. Make sure that your board of commissioners are onboarded correctly, that they have the bylaws, that they have your housing ordinance. So that gives you the rules, basically. And if you're not following the rules of those, you need to replace them or revise them so that you are. Those are really, really important documents. So hopefully, you can reach out and help them with that, because we're going to get into an area, a lot of people sometimes aren't aware that the steps that we have to take. So when it comes to a conflict of interest in the administration of a contract or the placement, of those tribal members, your family, we're related to almost everybody here. When someone in a position of trust has a competing professional and personal interest, when they make a decision in an official capacity and they stand to profit personally, when your interests have the potential to conflict with the best interests of the organization, of those you represent. That's, it in a nutshell under both scenarios. So under 318, okay, they actually even just revised 318 in October, okay? And now they're listing board members in the conflict of interest provision. We've always addressed it, but it's in here now. And board members, either be you or be them, they want you definitely to know that they're paying attention to that. So they've updated 318 when it comes to that language, and then they have inserted board members through there. So you have to maintain written standards of conduct covering conflicts of interest, even perceived conflicts of interest, governing the performance of your employees engaged in the selection, the award, and the administration of contracts. No employee, officer, agent can participate in the selection, award, or administration of a contract supported by a federal award if he or she has a real or even an apparent conflict of interest. And that's the kicker. It could be just a perceived conflict. Such a conflict would arise when the employee, officer, agent, any member of his or her immediate family. So this is another place where some of your rules and regulations are definitely going to come into play. The definition of immediate family needs to be used for your conflict of interest. It needs to be used in several places, but you have to have a conflict of interest policy that describes what you consider immediate family. So we'll get to how we got there in a little while. So it's when somebody has a financial or other interest in or a tangible personal benefit from a firm considered for a contract. Your officers, employee, agents of your non-federal entity must neither solicit nor accept gratuities, favors, anything of monetary value from a contractor or parties to subcontracts. However, your non-federal entity can set standards for situations in which the financial interest is not substantial or the gift is an unsolicited item of a nominal value. The standards of conduct must provide for disciplinary actions. So you have to have that in your standards of conduct to be applied for violations of such standards by your officers, employees, agents of your non-federal entity. So this is one we used. We toyed with 100, we toyed with 50, at different times. An employee shall not solicit or accept directly or indirectly any gift exceeding $50 in value, a gratuity, a favor, a loan, anything of monetary value from a person or organization who has in the past or tends to seek to obtain a contractual business or financial relationship with the housing entity, or who has interest which may be affected by the performance or non-performance of the employee's official duty. So I've had the students say, tell me about how non-performance could enter into this picture. Well, if you're building an apartment building, one of the things that I would do was I would spec that while they had the walls open, they would put the backing in all of the showers so we could later put in grab bars if they needed to age in place or if they needed them. It's a lot cheaper to do it when, those walls are open. Way cheaper. It's just something that I started to do in all my building. The non-performance, one of my staff, we sent him to school, paid for his school. He went to, took him like 3 or 4 years, an hour, a couple of times a week, through our community college building trades, came out as a certified inspector. Those are good to have. His non-performance is if that wall was opened up and he saw that backing wasn't in there, but he was, one of his buddies or that was a good old boy, he'd just let it go. That's the non-performance part, so you have to be, careful about even perceived relationships, drinking in a bar with your contractors, your staff, anybody that could have an interest which is affected by the performance or non-performance of somebody's official duty. So we also allowed our employee, this is ours, may accept food or refreshments of nominal value on an infrequent occasion in the ordinary course of a breakfast, luncheon, or dinner meeting, or other meeting where the employee may be improperly, in attendance, or they could accept unsolicited advertising materials such as pens, calendars, other items of a nominal value. We wrote this because of the NIHC and the AMREN conferences. And oftentimes you'd be sitting at a table and AMREN would have, 8 of the 10 people there were owners of AMREN, so they would pick up the lunch tab. We wanted to be able to do that and not get in trouble. We wanted to be able to go through and pick up the NIHC letter opener there, or take home the Native Learning Center pad, or the Northwest Indian Housing Authority to-do list. I have one of those here too, so that allowed us to do that. Things of a nominal value. The other things of a nominal value that I see our tribe struggle with is when one of our tenants try to gift, the maintenance guys, or they come in and they're so grateful that they have a house or whatever, they want to thank us. What we always told them is we could accept a gift of food that can go on the break room table and be shared by everyone, because a lot of times that's exactly what kind of thing it would be. They would like to gift us, food. So we allowed that. It wasn't to one particular person. It was shared with the whole housing staff and anybody that walked in the door, the contractors, everybody. So you can allow things like that also. So your written standards of conduct's required, that no employee, officer, or agent can participate in a selection, award, or administration of a contract if there is a real or apparent conflict of interest. When the employee, officer, agent, member of his or her immediate family, back down to, you got to have that good definition of what immediate family is for your policies, has a financial or other interest or a tangible personal benefit from a firm considered for a contract. Also 1030 for your Indian Housing Block Grant. Must maintain written standards of conduct with respect to organizational conflicts of interest. Now, that has to do with your governing body and your tribe. And that's, kind of a gray area on some things, but you should read in the Book of 200 basically about that. So when I write for the Intertribal Indian Housing Authority, ATIHA. So the Intertribal Indian Housing Authority prohibits its officers, employees, and agents from participating directly or indirectly in the selection or the award of the administration of a contract if a conflict, real or apparent, would be involved. Such conflict would arise when a financial or other interest in a firm is selected for an award is held by an officer, an employee, or an agent in making the award, or his or her relative. And this is the definition, and it's a long one, but that was the definition of immediate family we used. His or her relative, including a father, a mother, a son, or a daughter, a brother, a sister, an aunt, an uncle, a nephew, a niece, a husband, a wife, a father-in-law, a mother-in-law, a son-in-law, a daughter-in-law. Those are all immediate. Brother-in-law, sister-in-law. Then you get into your steps. Stepfather, stepmother, stepson, stepdaughter, stepbrother, stepsister, half-brother, half-sister. And it extends to your partner. Doesn't have to be your spouse. The law reads your partner, his or her partner. An organization which employs, is negotiating to employ, or has an arrangement concerning prospective employment of any of the above. Okay, so I had a scenario where I had a tribal councilman that we get a lot of snow here. And before he became a tribal councilman, he used to bid on shoveling jobs. Like last year, I think we got 189 inches. I'm quite sure that they put out a bid for shoveling our apartments in some of our buildings, our housing offices, our maintenance barns, all of that stuff, because you just can't keep track with, having to plow and having to shovel and keep your apartments open and then do the shoveling of all of that too. So every couple of years we get hit like that and would have to put it out. So one year, election came around in November, he ran for tribal council and got on there. Then he came into the office and he says, hey, when do you think you're going to put out bids for doing shoveling this year? And I said, I hate to break this to you, but I don't think that you should put in for that. Well, why not? I said, because it's going to be perceived as a conflict of interest because you're a tribal councilman. He kind of heed and hawed and kind of was mad about it in a way, but he understood. And he didn't put in for that 2-year term. You have to make sure that even that perceived conflict of interest doesn't happen. So, You prohibit everyone from soliciting or accepting gratuities, favors, anything of monetary value other than those unsolicited items of that nominal intrinsic value from any contractor or even a potential contractor, parties to subcontracts, and the knowing use of confidential information for actual or anticipated personal gain. Now, this is the written disciplinary action that I used. Okay. Disciplinary action will be taken to remedy violations of this code, may include a verbal or written warning, a formal reprimand, a suspension, or a dismissal. The level of that disciplinary action is going to depend on the severity of the violation, the individual's prior behavior, and the nature of the individual's position. Some people know better, and they need to know better. Notice that the Tribal Indian Housing Authority communicates these requirements in our codes during our orientations and trainings and the bylaws of the Board of Commissioners and its personnel and within the procurement policy. So that was our violation one. You also have to make sure about the use of confidential information, that your board members, that your staff members know that what happens at the Housing Authority is like Vegas. It stays in Vegas, or it stays in the Housing Authority. It's supposed to anyway. You're not supposed to be discussing your tenants. They're not supposed to be talking about, wow, hon, you wouldn't guess what happened in this meeting. This John Jack's getting thrown out. Somebody did this, and, they're not supposed to do that. And they need to be told that they're not supposed to do that. Your chairman needs to be trained on how to run a proper meeting because they look at your meeting minutes. I had one of the first chairman of NIHC came from Navajo. He's huge tribal council in Navajo. He definitely knew how to run a meeting. And we came, there's 9 of us basically from all over. We wouldn't see each other sometimes for 3 months. And of course, when we got there, we'd start chit-chatting. He'd give us 5 or 10 minutes. And then he'd put us on course. And then if we continued to do that, he'd on his glass. And you get that look. And then if he'd had to do it again, he's like, you guys need to go outside, excuse yourselves, and finish your conversation out there. But you don't want that recorded. You don't want to be dealing with anything that is not on that approved agenda. They need to know the proper meeting protocols also. So you cannot assume that because something is of that intrinsic value, that it can't get you in trouble either. That was one of the biggest mistakes I made. We don't have a Home Depot. We don't have a Lowe's. We try to distribute our purchases. You're supposed to throughout your communities. So we would buy from all over. There was one that would do a lot of building, and he would come in and he had building supplies, and he'd say, hey, you guys, building sheds, you doing anything? And he would come and check on us, once a month. He's a salesman. So the one day he came in and said, Cheryl, he said, I got these shirts. He says, is it all right if I give it, to your staff, your boys, the cleaning crew, whatever? And I remember, picking up this shirt, turning it over, looking, it's got, his lumber yard on it. Thinking, well, in bulk, this probably cost about $3 or $4. That's what I thought. I was looking at the value of that shirt. I said, sure, that's fine. And I'll be darned, those guys liked it. They'd wear it all the time instead of ruining their good clothes when they're painting or whatever. And I'm sitting at my desk and I'm writing an RFP. And I look up and I watch one of my guys in that shirt walk by and move a sprinkler after he mowed the lawn. And I looked down at the RFP and I thought, how would I feel if I was coming in to submit a bid and I see one of the people that I know I'm going to be competing against being advertised on the Housing Authority staff's clothing? It's like I had to go, hey guys, you guys gotta, I'm sorry, but you got to give those back. We can't wear them, So it's even that perceived conflict of interest that you guys have to make sure that you're aware of. And everybody makes a mistake. You just got to admit it and try to fix it when you do. So use of confidential information, make sure everyone knows what they're allowed to discuss and what they're not. Really, really important when it comes to contracting. Disclosure of confidential information to any person not authorized by the contracting officer who is normally your ED. Unless you're big and you've got your own building, procurement and all that. To receive information shall be a breach of the ethical standards. Confidential information includes, but is not necessarily limited to, the contents of a bid prior to your bid opening, a proposal prior to your contract award using a competitive proposal, names, individuals of firms that submitted bids prior to a bid opening, or proposals prior to a contract award. So I was in DC as chair, testifying, and we had put something out for bid. It wasn't a big contract, you know, I think it was painting of our units, some of our rental units or, you know, CAS units. And I came back and one of the staff said, we're getting a lot of bids, you know, and I think we're going to get some good ones, because I told them, you know, you better sharpen your pencil because this guy, and this guy, you know, put in. And I just dropped my head. I take all the bids back, rebid it all, let them know what happened. You also have to be careful that your front staff, you know, your front office staff, they'll send some cute guy in there to flirt away with your staff. I've seen it happen, you know. Well, who else is bidding on it? What else are you going to do? Are you going to be painting? How many units are you going to be building? You know, and they're trying to get this information out of them. But it goes further than that. You have staff members that's their job, to open the mail. They think that they can open a bid package that comes in. No, you can't. So you train that person, but they go to lunch. So you got to make sure the person that breaks them for lunch knows all of those proper protocols. You take it, you stamp the date and the time that you received it, and you put it over there and you don't touch it. So there's lots of things like that you learn over time, you know. But a lot of it can be a conflict of interest, even inadvertently. So your generated information related to procurement, your cost estimates, your contractor selection, your evaluation plans, your specs before your solicitation is issued, any other information which the disclosure of which would have a direct bearing upon your contract award or your competitive process. It's a breach of your ethical conduct for any current or former employee, officer, or agent to knowingly use confidential information for actual or anticipated personal gain, or for actual or anticipated personal gain of any other person. Hey, my son-in-law works for Sherwin-Williams, you know, I'm going to tell them they're going to be, you know, painting a lot of units, selling a lot of paint. You can't tell them. And you got to make sure that everybody knows that. So you should have confidentiality policies for a lot of different reasons. Lots of different, you know, signature attestations of your staff, of your board of commissioners, and, you know, the tribal council. This one is protecting the residents and the applicants and the contents of their files. So the housing authority provides decent, safe, sanitary housing, you know, to Native American housing households in accordance with those HUD guidelines. The housing authority seeks to protect the interest of the residents and applicants by prohibiting the exploitive use of personal information to the extent permitted by tribal and state law. The housing authority also is mandated by HUD, the confidentiality requirements to protect tenant information and housing authority records. In all cases, the release of housing authority records require the prior written approval of the housing authority's executive director. I've seen cases where it also requires the tenant's approval in some places. Now, therefore, be it resolved that it is the policy of the Housing Authority to protect the interest of the people we serve to the maximum extent permitted by law. All employees, members of the authority, including the commissioners and tribal council, are required to abide by this standard. Only inspectors, auditors, and investigators, others who are engaged in their normal function, as approved by Department of Housing and Urban Development, may have access to confidential information concerning our residents and applicants. So, you know, those files, you got to protect them. Mine actually we built like locked closets with physical, you know, digital locks on them. Only certain people were allowed even to go through the door to go get the files. It's really good business, and you need to know where your files are at all times. So you should have a sign out system too. Upon discovery of any actual or potential conflict of interest, your employee, officer, commissioner, agent must promptly file a written statement of disqualification, must withdraw from any further participation in whatever transaction is involved. Grantees, sub-grantees are going to maintain written codes of standards of conduct governing the performance of the employees engaged in the award or the administration of contracts. No employee, no officer, no agent shall participate in the selection or the award or the administration of a contract supported by federal funds if a conflict of interest, real or apparent, would be involved. So no person who exercises or has exercised any functions or responsibilities with respect to activities funded by the authority, who is in a position to participate in a decision-making process or gain inside information with regard to those activities, can obtain a financial interest or benefit from those authority-assisted activities, have any interest in any contract, subcontract, or agreement with respect thereto, or the proceeds thereunder, either for themselves or those whom they have a family or business tie during their tenure or for 1 year after. Such conflicts would arise when a financial or other interest in a firm is selected, for an award is held by, and then it goes through your list of immediate family again. I can't tell you how important your immediate family list is. And remember, it stretches out to his or her partners or an organization who is going to employ, negotiating to employ, or has an arrangement concerning prospective employment of any of those. So it's almost the same thing when it comes to the conflict of interest for your admissions. Okay, it's the same definition, basically. What is a conflict of interest? So the requirements regarding conflict of interest, the Book of 200-318 basically is the section that deals with conflict of interest. It has been, like I said, amended since October. Govern procurement, supplies, equipment, property, construction, services by recipients and subrecipients. Their guidance in the NAHASDA regulations at 1030, 32, 34, and 36, which would govern all those cases dealing with your admissions. There's program guidance speaking directly to the admissions that date all the way back to 2002, okay? Which require us to report a potential conflict of interest to our ONAP office. We have to also disclose to the public the conflict of interest, the nature of the assistance that you're going to provide to the individual, and the specific basis for which there was, no conflict. It's to make sure that you have fair and equitable treatment of all. You determine if conflict exists, disclose it to the public, report it to HUD prior to providing assistance. HUD can make an exception. If the family's low income, they qualify. It's not a conflict, but disclosure is required. If the conflict is only apparent or perceived, you make the disclosure, you inform HUD. So several ways to make a public disclosure. There's actually a document that you will have to manipulate because it says 2002, I believe, on it, and you've got to now make it, 25 in that program guidance. There's several ways to make a public disclosure, make the information available, just like you do your APR. You got to put that APR out for public comment. this is what you put out basically also. You can hang it in the same type of, place. There are some tribes that have public disclosure sections in their monthly meeting agendas, and HUD has to be provided with a copy of that disclosure. If the recipient is a TDHE, you should just, probably provide that disclosure to the tribe as well. So it goes back to this guidance. And one of the students in the room is old like me and was probably around on the front lines when this happened. And what they were doing was trying to find out how we were doing under NAHASDA. So they went out and they visited a whole bunch of housing authorities. And I mean, they went to everywhere, rancherias, large-based, small land-based. They went to the pueblos, they went to the villages, they went everywhere. They wanted a sampling of us all. And they did an audit of how we were doing under NAHASDA. So the Inspector General published its report of that audit, and the sixth finding was that among the housing entities reviewed, there was undisclosed conflicts of interest, preferential treatment in the admission to their housing programs. Over half of the housing entities audited had no process to ensure adherence to the conflict of interest requirements, or they couldn't prove that their admissions were made to eligible families and all of the members of the tribe were treated fairly. Remember, I told you, HUD very much cares that you treat everybody the same, okay? You can't be given special treatment. So your conflict of interest provisions apply to anybody who participates in that decision-making process, who gains inside information with regard to your assisted activities, not necessarily limited to your staff, housing board, tribal council, members of the immediate families, and their business associates. The requirements prohibit them from benefiting from their positions personally, financially, or through the receipt of any type of special benefit. They are allowed a salary or appropriate administrative expenses, though. It does not prevent your housing staff or your board members or their family, if they are actually low income, from receiving housing benefits for which they qualify. Okay? In order to comply with the conflict of interest requirements, you have to have in place a set of procedures determining when a conflict of interest exists for reporting that conflict to HUD, disclosing it to the public as required by the regulations. Your procedure should include a method for determining whether or not there is a potential conflict of interest. So the one that's easiest to use, does your housing application ask your applicants for any program that they're applying for if they have a personal or family or business relationship with your housing authorities' decision makers, whether it be the housing staff, the board of commissioners, or the tribal council. An administrative step for reporting your potential conflict of interest to your area Office of Native American Programs, disclosing to the public that conflict and the nature of the assistance to be provided to the individual, and the specific basis for which that selection of that individual was made. So there can be exceptions to the requirements. Now, the majority of the time, and I asked a lot of different TA providers, I asked HUD staff, do you know of very many exceptions that were ever made? And I only found one. And it wasn't the exception to let somebody into housing that was related. The exception was for a tribal chairperson who was termed out, who owned a construction company, and wanted to bid on a job that was coming up. He let HUD know, he recused himself, didn't see any information, stayed completely away from all of it, and asked if he would be allowed to bid on that job when he was termed out. And they allowed it because it promoted Indian preference. And he took all those steps to, make it evident that he was not making himself privy to any type of documents. That is the only case that I have really heard of. They'll ask about family members, and as long as they're next on the list, that's what they're looking at, that fair treatment. Now, you do have to get, from what I understand, permission first. Should the person be related to you on the tribal council or the board of commissioners and be within 80 to 100%? They're not low income. They're, medium income, I guess, or moderate income. Those you get HUD permission first, okay? Because that could definitely be a perceived conflict of interest. So those low-income individuals who those conflict of interest provisions would normally apply, housing staff, board, who qualify for assistance under your policies for eligibility, admission, and occupancy don't fall under the category of an exception. ONAP approval is not required to provide them with assistance. However, you have to make a public disclosure of the nature of the assistance to be provided to the individual, the specific basis for the selection of that person, and you have to provide your area ONAP with a copy of that disclosure before the assistance is provided. So I had that one firsthand. The staff members that were in charge of placing people in the housing placed a family member. And I came back and I said, "You did what?" And they said, "Yeah, they were next on the list." I just shook my head. I said, "No, you don't deal with your family members. You don't do anything with them. You shouldn't have them employed in the same building. You shouldn't supervise them. You shouldn't, there's a lot of things you shouldn't do when it's, that immediate family. But to place them in a home or to recertify them, shouldn't be doing that. Accept money from them, you shouldn't be doing that. There's a lot of things when it is your immediate family, you need to make sure that they are well aware of it. And because they are next on the list or whatever, you bring in tribal council, board of commissioners or whatever, and show them and say, she's coming up on the list, but I cannot be the one that gives her a house. So they know, so you are totally above board. So as tribal council, you have to watch for that also to make sure that that does happen, so not only the public disclosures, but they need to know what they can do when it comes to their family. And it goes the other way too. I mean, my maintenance guys, for instance, I absolutely loved them. One of their daughters lived in the apartment and he's like, "I don't need to give her, this amount of notice. That's my daughter." "Oh, yes, you do. She's our tenant. You can't treat her like your daughter and not follow the rules and give her, adequate warning that we're coming over to do something." It goes both ways. You have to make sure that you give them all the space that a normal tenant would get if they're family. So it goes both ways, and you just got to walk that fine line and make sure everybody's aware of that. So you need a procedure for the determination of a conflict of interest in your admissions, that you are going to put something in the packages asking about the relationship with your decision makers. You have to define what immediate family is in those policies. So this is the notice that's in there that you post, per the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The Housing Authority must publicly disclose when an individual directly affected or affiliated with the organization has qualified and been selected to receive assistance through the NAHASDA program. A potential conflict of interest is being disclosed due to immediate family members of employees or housing boards or tribal council with the ATIH, and they have applied for this housing and they have been selected, and the specific basis, they're American Indian or Alaska Native, they're low income as determined by HUD. It's going to be their primary residence, and they were next on the list. I always put, and they were next on the list, so be advised of the public comments. It has to be postmarked. within 7 days. If somebody, doesn't agree with that, and then that will be heard at the next board meeting. So I used to have a cup hook with a self-addressed envelopes on there stamped to the tribal council, that if there was a conflict of interest, you could just take it off and, send it. It's all ready. But the posting, you have to make sure it goes up for that full amount of time, that they sign it, that they put it up. They wait until that clock is ticked all the way down before they take it down. And in some circumstances, they let HUD know while they're doing this, because you have to get HUD's permission before you assist them. So the minute that you know that a family member or whatever is going to go into one of your units, while they're cleaning it, start that process, get that jump on it so you don't have to make them wait too long. So the notice was posted by on this day. It was taken down by this person on this day, and make sure that you go through all the appropriate timelines. All of your applications for every program that you offer, whether it be down payment, rental assistance, modernization, rehab, placement in a unit. Do you or any member of your household have a family or business relationship with an employee of the housing authority, with a board of commissioner, or a tribal council member? And this is the form that we utilized. Applicant's name, the program they were applying for, their application date. I'm applying for an ATI-HA program. Noted above, I'm disclosing that I am an employee, I'm a board of commissioner, or I am a tribal council member. I'm an immediate family member of the housing staff, the board of commissioners, or tribal council. I'm a business partner to same three, or I am neither to all of the above. If you are a family member or business partner of an employee, board of commissioner, tribal council, please state their name and your relationship. That acknowledgement. I understand a public disclosure of my selection will be made. A copy of this disclosure shall be submitted to HUD. I have been notified of my opportunity to receive a copy of the conflict of interest policy, to receive additional information from the housing authority. And I understand that this disclosure does not disqualify and or determine my application ineligible. So you have to have, that, pull down that guidance, make it your own. Look at your definition of immediate family and start taking those required steps, because they'll ask. You keep proof, like I told you a couple of days ago, that they were eligible for admission for the life that they're in your program. If you have to go through the filing, I kept that with it, and it stayed with it forever. I didn't want to be the person that got audited, a HUD monitoring 6 years down the road and said, well, yeah, we posted it, we kept it for 4 years and tossed it. No, it's easier to say, no, we did that, and here it is. I'm one of those people, So just make sure you have all of those proper things in place. Make sure you have standards of conduct. The awarding of contracts by housing recipients involves the expenditure of federal funds. Those stipends that those board members receive are federal funds. You got to make sure, employees and contractors were held to a higher standard of conduct than those with private contracts. To maintain confidence that your housing recipient's procurement process is fair, it's essential that those standards of conduct are maintained at all times. Your employees, your board members, they have to carry out their duties impartially to assure that fairness. They should conduct themselves in a manner as to promote confidence in the integrity of your organization. Any attempt by an employee or board member to realize personal gain by conduct inconsistent with proper procurement should be a breach of your housing standards of conduct. Now, I watched this with COVID money. There was a first come, first serve program, and the Board of Commissioners were the ones that designed it. And wouldn't you know, when you go over and look at the list, they were like 2nd, 5th, and 7th on that list. And I came back and I said, I'd like to talk to you guys and the tribal council. Because, you know, sometimes I would rather do the right thing than have them like me, which is not, you know, a good thing, but that's how I am. That's a perceived conflict of interest, but that is a conflict of interest. You know, if you had adequate money and you could serve everybody, it would be different. But you offered a first come, first serve, and you had immediate knowledge of prior knowledge than everybody else got. You should not, you know, sometimes you have to give up things because of your position. And it doesn't seem fair, but that's just what happens. You know, it has to. So make sure things like that don't happen either. So you make sure that your board members, you know, they carry out those duties impartially to assure fairness. Any attempt by an employee or a board member to realize that personal gain. They shouldn't be dragging their niece or their daughter in to speak on their behalf because they're late with the director. That's in one way the director's boss. I'm sorry, that's your immediate family. You need to recuse yourself. You're not supposed to drag them into the office and start arguing with them when they're not paying their money. So they need to know that, you know. Your person's covered. Any person who is an employee, agent, consultant, officer, elected, appointed official of the tribe, the authority, a subrecipient of your funds, officer, employee, agent, and making the award, family member, you know, using your definition of what family is. Remember, it extends to their partner or organizations who are going to employ or negotiating to employ. So upon discovery of a conflict, you are required to notify HUD in writing. Okay, that's what the rules in 200 tell you. So read about them. They're at 318 and a couple other different spots in there. Promptly file a written statement of disqualification, withdraw from further participation in whatever type of a transaction you're involved in. Your grantees and subgrantees need to maintain a written code of standards of conduct governing the performance of their employees engaged in the award and administration of contracts. They can't participate in the selection in the award of a contract supported by federal funds if a conflict of interest, real or apparent, okay? That's what can get you, is even the apparent, that perceived look. So no person who exercises or has exercised any functions or responsibility with respect to activities funded by the authority, who is in a position to participate in your decision-making process or gain any type of inside information with regard to those activities, can obtain a financial interest or benefit from an authority-assisted activity, or have an interest in any contract, subcontract, agreement with respect thereto, or though proceeds thereunder for themselves or for whom they have a family or business tie. Such conflict would arise when a financial or other interest in a firm is, you know, selected by them. So you also need a code of ethics. The Edmund Fitzgerald's 1,000-footer that Gordon Lightfoot used to sing about, and it sank probably 12 miles from here. So every year they have a ceremony and they ring that bell 29 times for the men that, you know, died on that ship. But now they ring it 30 times because of Gordon Lightfoot. My vice chairman was the one that went down in a submarine and brought that bell up. He was responsible for that and did an eagle bone ceremony. And so they always have a representative from my tribe ring that bell. And I was honored to do that one year and he took the picture actually. I've got a picture of me ringing it even. So you need a board of director code of ethics, you know, respect the opinion of your board members, respect and support the majority decisions of the board, recognize the authority is vested in the board when it meets in legal session, not with individual board members, keep well informed of developments that are relevant to the issues that come before the board, participate actively in board meetings and actions, call to the attention of the board any issues that will have an adverse effect on your housing entity or those you serve, attempt to interpret the needs of your constituents to your housing, and attempt to interpret the actions of your housing to your constituents. referred constituent or staff complaints to the proper level on the chain of command. Recognize the board member's job is to ensure that your housing authority is well managed, not to manage it. Vote to hire the best possible person to manage your housing entity. Represent all constituents and not solely a particular geographic area or special interest group. Consider yourself a trustee. Do your best to ensure that your housing is well maintained, financially secure, growing, and always operating in the best interest of your constituents. Always work to learn about the board member's job, how to do it better. Declare any conflict of interest between your personal life and the position on the board, and avoid voting on issues that appear to be a conflict of interest. Your members of your board will not be critical inside or outside of the board meeting of other board members and their opinions. Use your housing entity for personal advantage or the personal advantage of friends or relatives. Discuss the confidential proceedings of the board outside of the board meeting. Promise prior to a meeting how they're going to vote on any issue in the meeting. Interfere with the duties of the executive director or undermine the executive director's authority. Be involved in any type of self-dealing that provides personal gain. So you need to make sure that you have instruments like that in place. So that's what I just read to you, but I read it off the small print. Make sure they sign and date it. You should have a ceremony almost basically and swear them in. Ethical standards of conduct also. Your policies, you've adopted a series of administrative and management policies. They're formally adopted until they are revised or changed by formal action. The council, the housing board, and the staff are required to adhere to them. Some of the provisions in those policies, but not all, reflect requirements of our federal and tribal law. Our tribal council may, in certain unique circumstances, formally waive some policy requirements on an individual basis, but in order to do so, the waiver procedure identified later within the policy actually, should be utilized. The housing authority may have elected by formal resolution to establish alternative policies for programs that are operated without NAHASDA assistance or funding. Such alternative policies are not subject to this. Furthermore, the housing entity may from time to time adopt other rules, requirements, procedures to administer its programs, but all these practices must comply with your adopted policies. The purpose of the policy is to establish ethical requirements, standards of conduct for current and former housing employees, council, and board of commissioners, contractors, as well as your housing authority grantees. Your housing authority is a public tribal entity whose tribal council, board, staff, grantees, contractors, and subcontractors have to function with the highest ethical standards to ensure that the good and honest reputation of your housing entity is maintained and public monies are protected. The purpose of the creation of the housing entity is to serve the interest of the authority and your tribal members that they service, and not the personal interest of the employees or individual interest of elected, even tribal officials. So your policy simply and in a straightforward manner establishes ethical standards so the rules can be understood and adhered to. So waivers, it's intended to apply in all cases. However, in rare and unique circumstances, a special waiver of a particular requirement can be considered and approved by the tribal council. In the case of a policy, it can only occur where a waiver is expressly permitted elsewhere in the policy. Such a waiver can only be made if the council member with the personal, direct, or indirect interest abstains from and is not present for both the council deliberations and decisions. Full and complete public disclosure of a waiver request occurs before, during, and after a vote. A majority favorable vote of all council members appointed is obtained, and the waiver policy provision is not required by federal or tribal law. If the board is unsure as to which provisions are required by federal or tribal law, they should consult with legal counsel. The meeting minutes must reflect your board action. Where your tribe has established a law, bylaw, or resolution, ethical and conflict of interest requirements for your tribe, tribal council, tribal officials, and tribal entities, those standards shall apply. Furthermore, where standards permit waivers, all of the standards such as a waiver, may only be entertained using the waiver procedures found within the policy. Regulation and enforcement of tribal ethical standards shall be done by the housing, so long as no tribal law dictates otherwise. Those tribal standards are only minimal standards, and the following standards are additional. If a conflict arises between the tribal requirements, the following standards, the most stringent or highest standards, shall apply. The duties and responsibilities of your tribal council, board, employees, grantees, and agents are to your housing entity. Those interests are not to conflict with the personal interest of the council, the board, employees, grantees, and agents, nor shall there be the appearance of any conflict of interest. Employees have an obligation to conduct business within guidelines that prohibit actual or potential conflict of interest when dealing with customers, suppliers, employees. They're prohibited from receiving bribes, product bonuses, gifts, merchandise, tickets, trips, or unusual price breaks that would result in personal benefit or gain of the employee, customer, or buyer. An actual conflict of interest occurs when an employee is in a position to influence a decision that could result in a personal gain for that employee. Your tribal council officials who serve on the housing board as the liaison are prohibited from entering, proposing, or having a contract of any financial interest, direct or indirect, in any housing authority project or activity. The requirement may be waived in rare and unique cases, but only when the tribal council member involuntarily acquires or had acquired prior to the beginning of their tenure on the council any such interest. The interest must be immediately disclosed. The waiver requirements set forth shall be followed. Former council and board members are likewise prohibited from having such a contract or financial interest, directly or indirectly, in any housing authority project or activity for a period of 1 year after their tenure on the board. The later requirement can be waived in rare and unique cases, but only after a full and public disclosure and assurance that that interest is not obtained because of a non-public information obtained because of their prior board position. Your employees are prohibited from entering, proposing, or having a contract, anything of financial interest, direct or indirect, in any housing authority project or activity, except for subsequent employment arrangements. Former employees are prohibited from having a contract, any financial interest, direct or indirect, in any housing authority project or activity in which the former employee had a substantial interest, responsibility, involvement with during their position at the housing entity for a period of 12 months after termination of their employment. The later requirement may be waived in a rare and unique circumstance only after full and public disclosure and assurance that this interest is not obtained because of non-public information obtained because of his prior employment. So, no employee, tribal council, board of commissioner, officer, agent of your housing entity, any grantee shall participate in a decision, selection, award, administration of a contract if in fact or by appearance that council member, board of commissioner, employee, officer, or agent, any member of their immediate family, his or her partner, or an organization which employs or is about to employ, has a financial or other interest in the firm to be selected or awarded. All conflicts of interest shall be promptly, openly, and publicly discussed by both individuals and the housing authorities. Not participating in a decision, a selection, an award, or the administration of a contract shall mean not discussing the matter in or outside of the meeting, not being physically present during any discussions, and neither voting nor being present for a vote. You shall also refrain from viewing or retaining any related materials. Furthermore, it means not using a housing authority position to influence a decision in which you have a personal interest. Nothing in the policy shall prohibit a tenant, homebuyer, or program participant who is a tribal council member, board of commissioner, employee, officer, or agent, or grantee from fully participating in the housing authority activities and decision-making so long as those activities and that decision-making is not particular to their unit, application, contract, or housing authority activity. Gifts. The housing authority or grantees, officers, and employees will not solicit any gifts, accept any gratuities, favors, anything of monetary value from contractors, potential contractors, or parties or agreements. To agreements. It is determined that providing meals, entertainment, gifts in an amount in excess of $50 per gift or meal, or a total calendar year of meals, entertainment, or gifts in excess of $100 per individual by an individual company, including all related concerns and individuals, is determined to be of monetary value and therefore prohibited. Gifts shall be recorded in writing by the officer, employee, or agent, routinely discussed at the housing authority, and you will make actually the determination of that specific amount. Donations. Housing authority can solicit and accept donations to your programs. However, all solicitations and donations shall be open and public, recorded, must be for the sole benefit of the housing entity and not its employees, contractors, or council or board members. Furthermore, no donations shall be solicited or made while the party donating is seeking or being considered for a contract, and no donation shall be considered or accepted if it would influence the award of a contract or give the appearance of such a possible effect. No employee, tribal council, board member, his or her spouse who has any authority, control, influence in their official capacity shall accept any gift or money from a tenant, a home buyer, a program participant, or applicant if it would reasonably appear that such a gift was an attempt to influence that employee or board member's actions in the housing department. Special additional procurement and contracting practices are contained within the housing procurement policy also. So your employees, agents, and grantees may have acquired confidential and privileged information during their tenure with your department. They are prohibited from publicly discussing that information, from using information for personal purposes. Former tribal council board members and employees are prohibited from acquiring a contract or anything of financial interest, direct or indirect, in any housing authority department project or activity that is affected by confidential or privileged information, and that prohibition shall be for life. So the prohibition, however, may be waived by the housing authority, tribal council, only if the tribal council in its sole discretion so chooses and does so in writing and on the record. The information remains no longer privileged or confidential. The information is provided to your other competitors by the housing authority or potential competitors of the former employee or council member. Your housing authority may have other confidentiality requirements that are not contained in the policy that apply to your council and board members, employees, current and former, that are unrelated to confidentiality and conflicts of interest. Political activities prohibited. Tribal council, board of commissioners, staff, agents, and grantees shall not use the housing authority resources, money, contracts, personnel, or facilities for political purposes. The housing authority shall also restrain others from using the housing authority resources for political purposes. I told you my tribal council rolls every 2 years. And many a time would they come in and plop down in front of one of our staff's desk and waste a couple hours of their time. Election time, I used to put up a sign. You are welcome to visit the staff at their homes, but you are not allowed, to do any basically, politicking within the housing authority office. I witnessed firsthand, where a housing authority stockroom basically was getting raided by people that were running for tribal council at one point. And it put that executive director in a really bad spot because they were council members. And he's like, if I say something to them, Cheryl, they're going to fire me, and he had that in his, thoughts. So, things like this might stop activities such as that. So your responsibilities regarding your contractual obligations, your council board members, staff, agents, contractors shall not be delinquent on housing payments. That's huge. Owed to the housing authority or the department. Such delinquencies, unless immediately resolved after they had arisen, shall result in the termination of the employee or agent and removal of them as a council or board member. Furthermore, such individuals shall not violate any other contractual obligations that they might have with the housing authority or the department. They have to live up to their lease also. Okay. Your tribal council board commissioners have a fiduciary responsibility to take actions to do what is in the best interest of your housing authority. They need to adhere to all housing authority, tribal drug and alcohol rules and requirements, including those set forth within your personnel policy. All of you, council, board members, employees, agents, grantees are required to promptly disclose to the housing authority their acts and conduct, all acts or conduct by, tribal council members, employees, agents, grantees, contractors, tenants, program recipients that are illegal or are in violation of this policy and other housing authority policies. Disclosure can be given to supervisors, the executive director, the council members, individual council members, board of commissioners, and your tribal attorneys. There shall be no retaliation or other punitive action taken against anybody who makes a disclosure under this section when the activities disclosed turn out to be a true violation. So your board member involvement, the primary responsibility to housing is to establish those goals, those policies, those practices, to provide an overview and direction for monitoring the programs and activities. Your board members of whatever sort are to refrain from running the day-to-day activities of your housing authority, from individually interjecting themselves into management decisions except where authorized by the housing authority policies or tribal council direction. Elected tribal officials are important partners in carrying out the activities of the housing authority. They should always routinely consult and update the tribe as a designated official. However, if you operate as a tribally designated housing entity established as a separate organization, tribal officials cannot direct particular service assistance, such as loans, housing being given to, specific individuals and families, nor can tribal officials direct that the housing authority or TDHE policies be violated. The provisions apply regarding undue influence and violation of policy regarding all of the housing entity structures. So I always used to tell mine, I would come in and, if you look at my wrist, I like to wear gold. I won't wear silver for anybody. And they look at me, and I'm not going to break the law for you. I won't. I will walk first. You gotta be firm. The requirements contained in this policy shall additionally apply to all housing authority grantees and contractors. Where feasible, the standards shall be included in your grants and contracts where appropriate, repeated in your subgrants and your subcontracts. So you definitely need something to protect, because they want you to make sure you have conflict of interest training. You need to know, relationships with decision makers, things like that. They wanted to put cousin in the definition of an immediate family, and I argued till I was blue in the face. Do you know how many cousins I had by the time I was 12 years old? Cousin is not they're my cousin, but they're not my immediate family. So a prohibition against selling to the recipient. This used to be required under the 37 Housing Act. It is no longer required, but a lot of housing authorities either kept it or brought it back. Basically saying, for a year, you can't have any business with the housing authority selling them any type of product, so that conflict of interest in that 1 year prohibition, that's basically what that says. So any violation of the foregoing provision shall constitute misconduct in office. It should not be applicable to the acquisition of any interest and obligations issued in any connection with a project. When it has to do with a banking institution, for the deposit or handling of funds, or in connection with the project, or act as a trustee under any trust indenture, or to utility services, because those rates are fixed and controlled by a governmental entity, not members of the board. Okay, so our last module for today is on the Indian Housing Plan and your annual performance report. It's going to give an overview, basically. So it's your planning document for the upcoming year. You find out how much you're going to spend, and you tell them where you're going to spend it and how you're going to spend it. You can modify that at any point during the year. The only time that you are really required, see, doesn't matter what kind I put on there, I still jump. If you have CAS units and you decide that you are going to reduce the amount that you put in your initial budget for maintenance on those units, you actually have to amend your IHP. Okay, so it's your planning document as a recipient. This is what I'm going to do with my money. This is how much I have. This is how I'm going to spend it. This is any other money that I'm going to use. To receive that funds under NAHASDA, you have to submit that IHP and that APR yearly. And you can only get extensions of such a length of time. Certifications of compliance. This is really blurry. You might be able to see it better. You'll definitely be able to when you pull up the PowerPoint or whatever. Basically, the majority of that is saying you have all of your policies regarding rent and things like that in place. Don't make a liar out of your tribal council or whoever's approving this thing. Make sure that you have every policy that it requires in your IHP policy, and you have proof of adoption for it. And you know who's got has the tribe looked at it? Have you delegated the authority to your TDHE to submit it without your permission? You know, that's basically what that last page does. So your key components of your IHP, it's your 1-year plan of action for the use of that year's funds. You're going to describe your existing housing stock, access your housing needs, determine how you're going to allocate your resources. That guidance is at 2018-02. It needs to be redone, okay? Because it's talking about EPIC, and we don't use EPIC anymore. We utilize GEMS. But it's the only one we have. Hasn't been replaced, so that's what you use. Your IHP, your Indian Housing Plan, required by HUD to receive your funds, roadmap to responding to your housing needs. It spells out how you intend to use your funds. So it's your activities plus your budget equals your IHP. Submitting it, you know, the IHP APR of the tribe or your tribally designated housing entity. If you've been designated by more than one tribe, if you're, you know, an umbrella tribe or a village, you can do a single IHP for all your tribes within your jurisdiction if you want, and you have to include those separate tribal certifications. You're submitted 75 days prior to the start of your program year. It's supposed to be an effective management tool. It allows your recipients to have them in place at the start of the program year. Failure to submit it on time can result in no money for the year, okay? If your congressional appropriations are delayed, and that happens, I've seen it many times, if your program year estimate is available, you base your IHP on that. If not, you know, you use the estimate listed on your formula response form. Otherwise, you use the actual grant amount from your previous IHP. When you find out the last and true amount, you revise your IHP internally only, and then you make sure that that APR is accurate. You include that actual amount there. Extensions can be granted under exceptional circumstances. They can't waive a due date outside of the statutory limit provided within the NAHASDA statute at 101. You can request a waiver of your deadline anytime before or after your IHP is due. It can only be granted for up to 90 days after the original deadline. You can pay somebody to put your IHP or your APR together if you lose the person that normally does that. Okay, that's an allowable expenditure under your grant, under the planning portion. HUD does not want to ever take anybody's money away, okay? They will walk you through, even if you like mimic all of last year's and change the numbers and change the dates and submit it to keep that clock ticking. They will work so hard to make sure. I've seen it in 3 offices, 4 offices now. You know, this thing is due, you're late. Make sure, you know, submit this. I'll walk through this. What are you having trouble with? You know, so they don't want you not to receive that money. So always reach out, get that help. Don't be embarrassed. You need to keep your due dates of when your IHP and your APR, it should be up on a board so everybody can see it. Remember that APR, you got to have your monitoring done before it's due. You have to put it out for public comment, sweet spots like 10 days. You have to get the approval of the governing body. So you got to start backing up that due date. Your IHP, you do get graded on your IHP in your APR. Look at the ones that you put in before. If you are, for the last 5 years, saying you're going to help 25 families and you only help 2, change the amount. You can always modify it because you're appropriating money that you know you're not going to spend, or you have a good idea that you're not going to spend, you know, so they do look at that. So, you know, make sure that you've got a good living document that you change. If we have late appropriations, you're a smaller housing authority, you don't have very much money in locks, those are the certain conditions, you know. You call the HUD office, you tell them what's going on, they'll tell you if the money's available, and you put that in writing, you know, the request. They'll tell you who to send it to, probably the tribal or the, you know, the administrator at your EWONAP office. But the recipient's authorizing official must submit a written request to HUD. But you can get money if, you know, you're that late into the appropriations and you don't have a big locks balance. So our e-locks, our dialing for dollars, that's what I used to call it before it became computerized, should be on a reimbursement basis because you have 3 days from the time that that money hits your account. You can put in for it on a Thursday and it be dropped in your own account, you know, Saturday, and your clock's ticking. Saturday, Sunday, there's Monday on that 3rd day. You're on your 3rd day already. So we always tell everybody, do it on a reimbursement basis. You know, don't take monies in advance because you can get in trouble for that. So we utilize GEMS, you know, I talked about that. One of the first things they do that replaced Epic is they did away with the SF 425s. Unless you're an investment tribe, then, you know, you still do those quarterly. Otherwise, we all do them once a year. Now, as somebody who works with some troubled tribes once in a while, that can be a problem. So there's a lot of them, I'll say, I would suggest that you do your 425 and just put it in the drawer. Because if you have trouble with that finance component, you're going to be able to find it quicker. Our tribes that are housing departments really seem to struggle with the finance component because of the fact that the tribal finance person usually doesn't know a lot about our rules. They'll spend ICDBG in lieu of IHBG. They'll spend it before we get the environmentals done. You know, you really got to be careful that they know what they're doing. And I have seen several IHPs and APRs late because the finance component, they couldn't get the numbers. So if you're one of those people with the tribal council that has a housing department, get your finance person trained in NAHASDA. It's totally different. We have a different type of, you know, things that we have to do. Okay. We utilize the GEMS instead of the Epic now. There's instructions. These are all active links. You can learn, you know, self-registration, log in, learn about the website. They will continue to build on GEMS. GEMS is the reporting mechanism so Congress can see what we're doing. We never had a good mechanism. So they would ask us, you know, what did you do with all your appropriations? What happened with all the money in Indian country? And, you know, all the way back to even Jackie Johnson, I remember them saying, we don't have any way to measure that. Well, we have a way to measure that now. And GEMS is it. And you can bring up some of your old stuff and find it, you know, so it's a good repository. So there's a registration portal, signature attestation. Get familiar with that. Even as a board member, you need to be familiar with your IHPs, your APRs, how they do things. If you're one of the people utilizing that, get in there and query that once a month. Pick a date. The first or the second Monday of every month, I'm going to query everything that I have so I don't get locked out of locks, locked out of GEMS. A lot of these programs, you got to get into them. You can't, even if you just query them, okay? Because it's a pain getting back in them sometimes. There's the guidance about the federal financial report that we do not have to do them quarterly unless you're an investment tribe. Future GEMS, they're going to develop future releases of GEMS that's going to include more reporting modules, functions, additional ONAP grant programs. With those releases, the grantees will be required to use the new GEMS functionality. Grantees will be notified of the additional functions and requirements via the program guidance or Dear Tribal Leader Letters page. So remember, I told you that even if you're not a Dear Tribal Leader, read that letter page on your Code Talk, okay? So requesting HUD approval. This is for the people that are really remote and sometimes, you know, like Alaska, and we got one tribe in Wisconsin that there's no internet, there's no cable, it's like I couldn't even get cable. I couldn't even get a TV in the hotel. These people, there's still a mechanism to submit your stuff if you can't get good enough internet to utilize the GEMS. Okay. So if you have any questions regarding the notice, you can email that live link, or there's, like I said, there's a lot of links in there so you can learn how to utilize that program. So when you deal with your IHP, your APR, your programs, your projects, programs are ongoing activities. They're in every IHP that you do. Maintenance, administration, projects have specific start and end dates. They're dependent upon your annual funding decisions, development, rental assistance, things like that. Key sections, you know, you got your cover page, housing needs, program descriptions, maintaining that 1937 Act unit. If you have those units, you protect them with your life. So the first ones that when they go empty, you get back online, because that's a subsidy that you cannot replace, and it's the only program that comes with that subsidy. Budgeting, other submission items, and your certifications. So the cover page, you know, grant numbers, federal fiscal years, tax numbers, your SAM expiration dates, your need, number of low-income housing that, you know, families that you have, the need for all your Indian families, description of how your activities are going to meet your needs, your geographic distribution of funds, especially if you've expanded your formula area, your home ownership, your rental activities. You don't combine them. If you're constructing 5 home ownership units, 5 rental units, they have to be 2 separate activities. So programs, what recipient-specific program will be funded, what kind of eligible activities, you pick it from your eligible activities, what's your intended result, how many units or households are planned. And then this is one that I use. Recipients are going to provide down payment assistance for first-time homebuyers who wish to buy in the Tri-County area. Eligible activity, we're going to provide down payment and closing cost. Outcome, we're going to assist our renters to become homeowners. Who's going to be assisted? Well, we're just going to, you know, work with our low-income families right now. The level and type of assistance, well, it was $5,000 because I was trying to get away without doing the insurance requirements and the useful life. $5,000 isn't enough, so I had to blow that up. And we were only going to try 4 units the first time out. That was our planned output. We figured we could always amend it if we had more. So there is guidance on allowability, outcomes, and outputs, because different things are measured different ways. Some are by household, some are by unit, some are by dollars, some are by units and dollars. And then your 1937 Housing Act, Are you planning on doing any type of demolition or disposition? Or if you have a fire. I had a fire in an apartment building. I had to get permission because I couldn't get it fully occupied within 1 year to keep that money safe, that subsidy. Because my first priority was middle of the winter is finding houses for all of those people that were dislocated. That took me, a month. And then you put it out for bid and you have to go through the winter, stuff. And so we were late, but they allowed it, your 1937 Housing Act, I demo dispoed a 10-unit project. You had to prove that it was financially prudent to build on the footprint rather than to rehab the unit. And we used BIA, we used IHS, we used all sorts of people to prove that. And they allowed it. And then they allowed us to continue to receive those subsidies on that money. Sources of funds, the funds on hand at the beginning of the year, expected to be received. There's a lot of accounting to do with your IHPs and your APRs. That's why I'm saying, somebody's got to have their hands on that. They can't just think they're just going to take the checks and pay the bills. Must include anticipated receipt of your program income. So they got to know what that is. Uses of funds, prior and current year IHBG anticipated to be expended on each program. So there's all sorts of things like that. You have other submission items, your useful life is in your IHP. Read your useful life. See if you're adhering to that. Model activities, assistance to your over income families. Well, if you're going to exercise that 10% authority, you're going to put it in your IHP. Tribal preferences. You're allowed to give tribal preferences. Put it in your policy. Your administration, if you are in an expanded formula area. And then you have certifications, compliance, tribal certifications, tribal wage rates, self-monitoring. For those of you that have missed class, and I had a couple of you in here that missed a couple of days ago, when you get to this portion and they ask you about your tribal wage rates, they're not asking about your wage grid. They're asking if you're putting something in lieu of Davis-Bacon, okay? For building, for drywallers and people of that sort, your tradespeople. Your timelines for your IHP, 60 days for your original submission, 30 days for any type of amendment. What are they going to look at? Is it complete? Are all your required elements included? Eligibility. Are all activities eligible? Affordable housing activities under the statute? Consistency. Are all the key sections of your IHP consistent in a meaningful way? You only have to revise it, like I said, if you're going to add a new activity, or you reduce that amount budgeted for the operations and maintenance of your FCAS, that 1937 Housing Act. These are some upcoming due dates, when they will be due. 90 days is the max on that extension, unless it's a disaster, basically. So the guidance, sometimes Congress doesn't appropriate funds until well into the fiscal year. Not uncommon to have your appropriation occur in January, sometimes later. Your recipient may not know your final block grant until then. To address that, HUD runs a draft using the anticipated level of funding, publishes the information using your formula response form. So use that amount. As I said, fix it in your APR. If it's unknown at the time it's due, you can base your budget on that estimate. When the final appropriation is known, update your IHP within your files, include the final amount. For any recipient whose IHP has not been found in compliance, once the final budget appropriation is available, your area ONOP will automatically process the grant agreement and send it to the recipient. So the guidance, if you add a new activity, reduce your support for that 37 Housing Act, you have to submit an amendment, okay? If not, you don't. So your housing needs description, you need to describe your housing needs for your tribal members, how many units of new housing is needed, what type is needed, elderly, multiplex, independent living centers, what type, composition, veteran, disabled, college student housing. amount of major and minor repair needed on your existing housing, other data such as average annual income, whether existing homes in your service area have adequate plumbing, electricity, other utilities. Those assessments can help you develop your short and long-term range plans. Determine your need, what you need to go after. We pushed and pushed and pushed for mortgage product, mutual help homes, built, upwards of hundreds of them. And then they said, okay, now we got to focus on something for our young people, because we got 35-year-old men still living with their moms, and we had a huge part of our population that was coming of age, so we started building apartment buildings. So program descriptions, down payment assistance, other home buyer assistance, operation and maintenance, rehab, closing cost, your useful life. Go back and look at those, see if you're adhering to that. Find out if you have a useful life policy. Other submissions, tribal and Indian preference, model and over income activities. If a model activity is proposed for funding, you have to describe the undertaking and the type of households you're going to serve. You describe your preference policies given to tribal members or other Indian families for housing assistance and employment contracting to Indian organizations and Indian-owned enterprises. Okay. Tribal certifications. They're going to ask if you're from a wealthy tribe to certify that you have, if you're receiving under $200,000, that you actually have people within your area that are at 80% or below median income, that your whole tribe's not over income. Eligibility, admission, occupancy policies in place, home buyer payments in place, insurance coverage for our housing units, comply with the Civil Rights Act, the Rehab Act. So make sure you're doing all that, because you're certifying that every year that, then you come in and you have a monitoring in there. Hey, you guys have been saying you're doing this and you're not, or you don't have it. You don't want to be there. So your administrative and planning costs, dependent upon how much you get. If you get more than $500,000, you can utilize 20% of that grant. If you get less than $500,000, you can utilize 30%. Some of those eligible costs are preparation, like I said, of your IHP and APR, your staff overhead costs directly relating to carrying out your activities, challenging your formula amount, overall program cost for your administrative management, other A&P cost as considered at the discretion of the recipient. I'm sorry, I talked too much. I left you here too long, but we made it. Come back tomorrow, okay? Are you here, my girl, Brianna?
Oh, I'm here. That was great. Thank you so much, Cheryl, for your time and your effort with this presentation. I definitely learned a lot. You are full of information.
I'm full of something. No.
You know a lot, Cheryl. Listen, I would be like, but as I close out this webinar, please feel free to submit any other questions or comments that you may have for Cheryl at this time. That way she can go ahead and answer them. And then I'm just gonna.
Cheryl, this is Lois Costello Carter from the Mattaponi Indian Tribe and Reservation in Virginia, and I just wanted to tell you that unfortunately I've been under the weather for the last couple of days, and but today I'm back in the saddle again. But I wanted to just let you know that this is fantastic. Contacts is definitely, and I see your card here, what I need, because I am, fairly new at this. I've gone through one training, working with some consultants, but I think just listening to your energy and listening to, you living this has really helped me today. Great. And understanding more, and just the willingness of you. And I hope it's you or someone else here that I can reach out to, because I'm getting a little afraid of this, the gyms, as far as putting all of that budget information together. So, I mean, I got to get my feet wet. I've got to, take a dive. So I think the expert, and this is my opinion, I think the expert, which is you and others here on your team and on this call, are going to be the experts, or have been, and you've got the experience. And I'm going to be ringing your phone if you don't mind, or someone guide me to whomever you'd like for me to go to.
Mr. Joseph Deal in the background is a CPA.
Woo.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he's on there right now.
Alrighty. Here you can find Cheryl's information. So her email is there, her phone number. Again, if you just want to ask any questions. And then I have also pasted the link for today's feedback survey. So please take a moment to complete our survey about today's webinar. It only takes about a minute or so, and your feedback really helps us to do more of what is working well and to improve on the areas that we need to. We do invite everyone to be as candid as possible. The survey is completely anonymous, okay? And we do hope that you can join us.
We're not allowed to buy alcohol on here also, by the way. You may not expend HUD funds on alcohol.
And just a quick reminder that we will be back here tomorrow. So we will see you all for day 5. Yes. And we encourage you to sign up as well for our email list so that you can always be aware of the exciting webinars and trainings hosted by the Native Learning Center.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. Stay safe. Come back tomorrow, please.
Yes, and you can all feel free to access today's webinar and any other recorded webinars at our new Cathedral Webinars archive, now posted to our YouTube channel. Feel free to view them and share with your colleagues and friends as well. And please also check out our upcoming events posted to our various social medias. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, as well as LinkedIn. We also have an in-house produced podcast titled the Hopathanga Native American Podcast, where we discuss more focused topics within Native American housing and self-determination. You can also listen to us on Simplecast, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, as well as view the video recordings with our guests on YouTube. And once again, thank you all for being here with us today. We hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day, and we hope to connect with you really soon. Again, Cheryl, thank you so much for all of your wonderful information. I am going to leave the meeting up so that if you want to grab any of those links, that you all can have access to them still. So I'll still be here, but I know, Cheryl, you have to go again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day.